The nights in the Sierra Maestra were merciless, not because of the cold, nor the dampness that seeped into every bone, but because of the silence. Silence, in the mountains, was never comforting. It was a reminder that the enemy might be listening, stalking, preparing. For Che, it was a reminder of something far more personal. How loud a man's own heart could become when the world around him dared to quiet down. On this particular night, the jungle breathed in slow, restless sighs. Leaves shivered at the passing breeze. The sky, dark as the inside of a rifle barrel, hung low over the valley. Smoke curled lazily from dying campfires. The rebels slept in scattered clusters, curled beneath crude shelters, rifles close to their chests like cold lovers. Che sat alone near the edge of a ridge, the dim glow of a lantern casting long shadows across his face. Even with his asthma tightening its grip on him, he preferred the solitude to the cramped tent where whispers, snoring, and restless turning made rest impossible. The inhaler lay at his side, but he fought the urge to use it. Stubbornness had always been his quiet companion. He scribbled in a worn notebook, pausing every few minutes to catch his breath. The words refused to behave tonight. They wandered, tangled, contradicting each other. He wrote about the day's march, about the comrade who nearly stepped on a hidden mine, about the villagers who offered what little food they had. But his mind refused to stay chained to logistics and observation. It drifted, first to Argentina, then to Cuba, then to the faces of the comrades around him, then to the deeper question that had stalked him for months. What price must a revolutionary pay to remain human? He rubbed his eyes and closed the notebook. Somewhere behind him, someone stirred, and he instinctively reached for his rifle. But the sound faded, replaced by the nocturnal hum of insects and the distant hoot of an owl. He exhaled, forcing himself to relax. "You're awake again." The voice came from his left, soft, low, and edged with that familiar roughness born of exhaustion and discipline. Che turned slightly, but didn't need to see the figure fully to recognize the tone. He had come to know it too well. She stood beneath a tree, arms crossed, her posture loose, yet alert. The lantern's glow reached just far enough to reveal the outlines of her face, the strands of dark hair escaping from her bandana, the way her eyes glinted with quiet intelligence. He tried to keep his voice level. "I could say the same about you." She stepped closer, the leaves muffling her footfalls. "I was checking the perimeter." Again, some of the new recruits are careless with their watches. Che smirked faintly. "They're young. Half of them think war is a heroic song until bullets sing back. And the other half," she added, "think the revolution will cradle them like a mother." He looked at her, studying the way she spoke, not with cynicism, but with weary truth. That was one of the first things that had struck him about her. Many comrades spoke of hope and sacrifice with fiery idealism. She spoke of them with the calm, steady resolve of someone who had already sacrificed more than she could measure. "You should sleep," Che murmured. "So should you," she countered. "But we both know neither of us will." She was right, and the acknowledgement between them, of sleeplessness, of shared burdens, lingered in the air longer than either intended. An invisible thread stretched between them, fragile yet unmistakable. Che turned back to the ridge. "Sit," he said quietly. She hesitated for a moment, then lowered herself onto the ground beside him. Not close enough for touch, not far enough to pretend distance. She rested her elbows on her knees, looking out over the darkness below. "You can barely breathe," she noted after a moment. "It's nothing. It's asthma. It's not nothing." He shot her a sideways glance. "Since when did you start worrying about my lungs?" She didn't smile, but something in her eyes softened. "Since I realized the man leading half of our operations barely sleeps, barely eats, and insists on climbing the steepest terrain. Someone has to keep you alive, even if you're determined to make it difficult." Chase stared at her for a long moment, surprised at how closely she watched him, how much he saw that others overlooked. "I'm fine," he insisted again, though his breath caught slightly at the end. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. Her silence was an argument in itself. For a while, neither spoke. The jungle's chorus filled the space between them. Che's heartbeat slowed just enough for him to feel the ache in his ribs ease. He found himself strangely grateful for her presence, not comforting, exactly, but grounding. "Do you miss them?" she asked suddenly. He blinked. "Miss who?" "Your family. Your children." Che inhaled sharply, not from asthma this time, but from the unexpectedness of the question. Most comrades avoided the topic, afraid of stepping into personal territory that the revolution didn't have room for. "Yes," he said, voice low. "I miss them every day." "And your wife?" He hesitated. "Her too." She nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the shadows below. "I used to think love had no place in war," she murmured. "But maybe it's the only thing that keeps people fighting." He studied her profile, the hardened jawline, the faint scars along her arm, the exhaustion written into her posture. She wasn't speaking philosophically. She was speaking from pain. "You left someone behind?" Che asked gently. "A brother," she replied. "A mother. A man who cared for me more than I deserved." He didn't push. He simply waited. "They all wanted me to stay away from this fight," she whispered. "They said war would swallow me whole, that I would lose myself. Have you?" "Not yet," she said, though her voice wavered. "But I fear I'm close." Che felt something tighten in his chest, not asthma, but understanding. Deep, sharp understanding. "The revolution demands a lot," he said quietly. "Sometimes too much." She turned toward him then. The lantern glow finally reached her full face. Strong features, eyes haunted but defiant. A flicker of vulnerability beneath layers of discipline. "It demands everything," she corrected. "Even the parts of us we're not ready to give." For the first time that night, Che couldn't maintain his leader's mask. Something raw flickered across his expression. Pain, longing, guilt, hope, all tangled into one. "You speak as if you've already lost something," he said. She didn't look away. "Maybe I have." Their eyes locked, and the air around them thickened, not with romance, but with recognition. Two souls who had given too much, who had buried too much, suddenly aware that someone else understood the weight they carried. A gunshot echoed faintly in the distance, not close, but close enough for both to reach for their rifles instinctively. They scanned the darkness. After a tense moment, she exhaled. "Hunters, probably." Che nodded, but his heartbeat didn't settle. Not because of the gunshot, but because of her. Because of the way her nearness sent a tremor through the quiet he had guarded so fiercely. "You should go back," he said again, softer this time. "So should you." But neither moved. Instead, she whispered, "You know, I used to think you were made of stone." He raised an eyebrow. "And now I see cracks." He huffed a quiet laugh. "Flattering." "It's not meant to flatter," she said. "It's meant to warn you. Cracks can break a man." He held her gaze, feeling the truth of her words settle into him like a shard of ice. "Maybe," he said, "but sometimes cracks let the light in." For the first time, she truly smiled, small, faint, but real. And in that fleeting moment, illuminated by a dying lantern and surrounded by the endless dark of the mountains, something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but the spark of something forbidden, something dangerous, something that would change everything. She stood slowly. "Good night, Che." "Good night," he murmured. But as she walked away, disappearing into the shadows, Che felt the quiet night shift around him. Not just silence now, but possibility. A possibility that carried both fire and ruin. Dawn in the Sierra Maestra did not arrive gently. It burst through the trees with a fierce, relentless glow, as if the sun itself were a soldier refusing to wait another second before charging into battle. The jungle awoke with a roar, birds shrieking, branches rustling, boots pounding as the rebels prepared for another day of marching and surviving. Che stood near the camp perimeter, adjusting the straps of his worn pack. His lungs already protested, but he ignored the familiar tightening. Today, his mind felt unusually restless. Last night's conversation lingered like smoke in the air, refusing to fade, refusing to be forgotten. He caught sight of her on the other side of the clearing. She was speaking with two newer recruits, her tone firm but patient. Her hands moved as she spoke, measured, controlled. The recruits nodded with a blend of respect and fear, the kind she naturally evoked. She wasn't the loudest or the strongest among them, but there was something in her presence that commanded attention. Something in her eyes, dark, sharp, and quietly aflame, that suggested she could weather any storm, including the one inside herself. Chase saw that fire before he understood her story. And even now, he wasn't sure which unsettled him more, the story or the fire. A few minutes later, she finished giving orders and walked toward him. Her footsteps were steady, confident. She stood in front of him, arms crossed lightly. "You're watching the recruits again," she said, eyebrow raised. "They're children," Che replied. "Barely old enough to shave." "So were you when you started fighting?" she said. "Maybe not in age, but certainly in impulse." Che smirked. "Are you calling me impulsive?" She didn't answer with words. She simply gave him a look that said, "You know what you are." He cleared his throat. "The patrol report?" She handed him a small notebook. "Two Batista scouts passed through the northern trail at dawn. They didn't get close enough to see us, but they're searching more aggressively. They're getting desperate." "Good," Che muttered. "Desperation leads to mistakes. And mistakes lead to blood," she countered. Their eyes met. For a moment, Che felt the crackling tension again, the invisible current that ran between their silences. But he forced himself to look away. He reminded himself who he was, a leader, a symbol, a man who could not afford to falter. She walked with him toward the center of camp, where Fidel was coordinating the morning tasks. Rebels moved in chaotic lines, loading rifles, tearing stale bread with their teeth, checking maps drawn in pencil on scraps of paper. As they approached Fidel, she lightly touched Che's arm to stop him. "Before you go," she said softly, "I want to tell you something." Che nodded, suddenly too aware of her hand near him. "You asked last night if I had lost something," she said. "Or someone." Her voice was calm, but her eyes flickered, not with softness, but with ghosts. Che didn't speak. He let her continue. "There was a village," she began, "not far from where I grew up. I had a brother, 3 years younger. Strong. Quiet. He believed everything I believed, but he didn't have the courage to fight. He wanted peace. He thought the world could be changed with words and patience." "And you didn't?" Che asked gently. "I wanted action. Fire. I couldn't stand the corruption, the hunger, the way the rich spit on us." She paused. "I joined the movement because I felt like I was suffocating." Che understood that suffocation. He lived with it every day. "One night," she continued, "Batista's men came to our village. They were looking for rebels. They didn't find soldiers. They found families." Her jaw tightened. "They took my brother, questioned him, hurt him. He didn't even know what to tell them. After a week, they released him broken. Nothing left inside him but fear." Che felt his fists clench. She swallowed hard. "He died 2 months later. Not from wounds. From what they took from him." Che exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry." "You don't need to be," she replied, but her voice trembled. "It's the reason I'm here. The reason I fight like I do." He looked at her with a new understanding. Her strength wasn't born of pride. It was born of loss. "How old were you?" he asked. 19, she said. "Barely old enough to hold a rifle properly. And now, 23. So young. Too young for so much pain." Che's gaze lingered on her face longer than it should have. The fierce lines drawn by hardship. The quiet resilience etched into her expression. She felt his stare and stiffened, not out of offense, but out of habit, a reflex of someone unused to being examined with tenderness. "Why are you telling me this now?" Che asked. "Because last night," she said, "you asked if I'd lost something, and I didn't answer." Che swallowed. "And have you lost something recently?" She hesitated. Her eyes drifted toward the treetops. "Nothing I'm ready to name." He felt that answer settle uneasily between them. A whistle from across camp broke the moment. Fidel called out orders, and the soldiers began to gather. She straightened. "We'll talk later." Che nodded, though he wasn't sure whether he wanted that conversation or feared it. The morning march began shortly after. They moved through dense foliage, weapons ready, nerves tense. The trail was narrow, forcing everyone to walk in single file. Che led the column. She walked 2 places behind him, close enough for him to hear the soft crunch of leaves beneath her boots. Every few minutes, he caught himself listening for her movements. It irritated him, how involuntarily he noticed her. The path steepened, and Che's breathing became strained. Sweat dripped down his forehead as his asthma pressed tighter. He slowed just slightly. "You all right, Commandante?" she murmured from behind. "I said I'm fine," he answered sharply, though he wasn't. "Fine," she echoed skeptically. Half an hour later, danger arrived without warning. A crack echoed through the valley, the unmistakable sound of a rifle cocking. Before the rebels could react, a spray of bullets shattered branches overhead. "Ambush!" someone shouted. Chaos erupted. Rebels dove behind rocks, scrambling for cover. Che grabbed his rifle, chest burning as he shouted orders between ragged breaths. She sprinted forward, not away from the bullets, but toward the flank where the gunfire originated. "Cover me," she yelled. Che cursed under his breath. No, wait. But she was already gone. He saw her dart behind a fallen tree, firing sharp, calculated bursts. Her movements were fearless, precise, terrifyingly confident. Another rebel was pinned down not far from her, clutching his leg where a bullet had grazed him. She didn't hesitate. She rose, exposed for a split second as she reached him, pulled him down behind cover, and returned fire with furious accuracy. Che felt something twist inside him. Admiration, fear, anger, all colliding violently. "Move, move!" he shouted, rallying the others. Within minutes, the attackers retreated, leaving only echoes and trembling leaves. When the dust settled, Che rushed toward her. She was wiping blood, someone else's, from her hands. "What the hell were you doing?" he demanded, breathing hard. "Saving a life," she shot back unbothered. "You could have been killed." She met his gaze, eyes blazing. "So could you. So could any of us. That's what war is." He opened his mouth, ready to argue, but the words dissolved. She wasn't reckless, she was brave. Terrifyingly brave. Braver than most men he'd commanded. Still, the fear he'd felt, not for the mission, not for the revolution, but for her, shook him. He didn't know when she closed the distance between them, but suddenly she was close enough for him to see flecks of amber in her eyes. "Don't mistake courage for carelessness," she said softly. "I know what I'm doing." He swallowed. "I know." Their breath mingled for a fraction of a second. Then she stepped back, the moment snapping like a twig underfoot. "We should move," she said, returning to the group. Che watched her walk away, heart pounding harder than the shootout had made it. In that moment, he knew something with terrifying clarity. The danger wasn't just the soldiers hunting them. The danger was her, and what she was starting to mean to him. Night fell with a vengeance. Clouds smothered the moonlight, leaving the jungle draped in a darkness thick enough to swallow sound. The rebels had set up camp in a steep ravine, where the trees leaned so close together they seemed to whisper secrets to one another. Fires were forbidden tonight, too dangerous after the ambush. So the camp lived in shadows, lit only by the faint red glow of smoldering embers and the glint of metal from polished rifles. Che paced near the makeshift command tent, still replaying the day's ambush in his mind. He had led dozens of operations, survived countless near-deaths, and faced the enemy at distances so close he could smell the sweat on their skin. Yet none of that unsettled him the way the memory of her running across open fire did. Every time he blinked, he saw her silhouette in the bullet's path. His jaw tightened as he forced the images back. He needed control of the camp, of the mission, of himself. Especially himself. "Commandante," a young soldier whispered, approaching with a shaky salute. "Do you need anything?" "No," Che replied. "Get some rest. You'll need it." The boy nodded gratefully and disappeared into the shadows. Che watched him go, then let out a long breath. His lungs rasped in protest. He had pushed himself too hard again. He could still smell gunpowder lingering on his clothes. As he turned toward the tent, he sensed movement behind him. Soft, steady, familiar. She stepped forward from the darkness, the outline of her figure sharpening as she approached. Her hair was tied back, her face streaked with dried dirt, her eyes unreadable in the dim light. "You're pacing," she said quietly. "You're observing," he shot back. "I always observe." He forced himself not to smile. "So I've noticed." A rare smirk flickered on her lips, half a second long, but real. Then it vanished, swallowed by something heavier. She crossed her arms. "You're angry," she said. "Should I not be?" "For what?" she challenged. "For doing my duty? For saving a comrade?" "For risking your life," he answered, the words harsher than intended. Her jaw tensed. "What did you think we were doing out there?" "Picking flowers." He stepped closer. "You know that's not what I mean." Silence crackled between them, the kind of silence that reveals more than words ever could. Finally, she looked away. "I wasn't reckless." "I know," Che said. "But that doesn't make it easier to watch." The truth hung openly between them now, no longer hidden behind sarcasm or arguments. She swallowed, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his voice. "Why does it matter so much to you?" she whispered. Che froze. He had no answer, at least none he could say, without crossing a line he had sworn never to cross. "It matters because every life here matters," he said carefully. She raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Do you tell that to every soldier with that tone?" He exhaled, defeated. "No." Her eyes softened, but only slightly. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint scar near her collarbone, the one she had gotten months ago in some battle she never talked about. "You scare me when you speak like that," she said, voice trembling for the first time. "Because I don't know what you're trying to tell me." Che felt something collapse inside him, a wall, a defense, a distance he had maintained for too long. He looked around. The camp was quiet, soldiers asleep or half asleep, no one paying attention. Still, being seen together like this too long was dangerous. "Walk with me," he said softly. She hesitated, then nodded. They moved away from camp, weaving between trees until the murmurs of the soldiers faded into nothing but distant breathing. The forest canopy loomed above them like a cathedral roof. Chase stopped at a fallen log. She sat beside him, leaving a careful gap between them. He could feel the heat of her presence nonetheless. His voice broke the silence first. "When we were ambushed," he said, "I felt something I haven't felt in years." She looked at him, waiting. "Fear," he admitted. "For yourself. For you." Her breath caught, not audibly, but in the slight widening of her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. "You shouldn't," she whispered. "I'm not someone to be protected." "I know that," he said. "But fear doesn't always follow logic." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the log. "Fear leads to mistakes." "So does caring," he murmured. That word stung the air between them. Her chest rose faintly, sharply. "Che." He shook his head. "Don't," he said. "I know. I know what this is. What it could be. What it should never be." She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was a mix of fury and sadness swirling within. "Then why are we here?" she asked. "Alone. In the dark. Talking like this." He had no answer. So she continued. "You say I scared you today," she said. "But you scared me more when you grabbed my arm afterward. The look in your eyes," she swallowed. "You looked at me like you'd already lost me." Che's throat tightened. Maybe I had. The jungle rustled around them, a quiet witness to their unraveling restraint. She leaned forward slightly. "Do you remember when we first met?" He nodded. "You corrected me in front of the recruits. You were giving them the wrong instruction." He laughed despite himself. "And you didn't hesitate to call me out." "You're not a god, Che," she said. "Just a man." He looked at her sharply. "Sometimes I forget that." "Sometimes," she said softly, "I wish you would remember." The distance between them shrank without either of them moving. It simply dissolved. "Tell me something," she whispered. "If we weren't here, in this war, in this jungle, would you still avoid looking at me that way?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he reached out, slowly, trembling, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers barely grazed her skin, but the touch burned like fire. She inhaled sharply. "Che." He withdrew his hand as if it were a sin. "Maybe it was." "This is impossible," he said. "Then why does it feel inevitable?" she countered, her voice breaking. He looked at her, truly looked at her. The strength, the scars, the vulnerability she allowed no one else to see. The quiet fire that both terrified and drew him. The moment stretched, fragile and dangerous. Then she moved. Not toward him. Not away. Just enough to close the gap of fear. Her hand reached for his, stopping just an inch short of contact, as if asking permission without asking. Che felt the air leave his lungs. He should pull back. He should stand up. He should return to camp, swallow every feeling, bury it under duty. But he didn't. He let his fingers brush hers, light, almost accidental. A spark shot through him, sharp enough to make him gasp. She intertwined their fingertips, the barest connection, but it felt like the world tilted. "I don't want this," she whispered. "Neither do I," he whispered back. "But I can't stop it." "Neither can I." Their hands remained joined in a fragile, trembling bond. Minutes passed like stolen lifetimes. Finally, she pulled away, not abruptly, but with the slow sadness of someone tearing herself from something she knows she shouldn't want. "We can't do this," she said, stepping back. "I know. It's dangerous. I know. It could destroy everything." He looked at her, heart aching. "I know." She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warm night. "But I don't regret this moment," she said quietly. He felt something inside him collapse with relief and anguish. "Neither do I." She took a final step back into the shadows, her silhouette fading into darkness. "We have to be careful," she whispered. "If anyone suspects—" "They won't," he said, though he wasn't sure. "One more thing," she added, voice trembling. "Yes. Don't scare me like you did today." "I can't," she stopped, breath shaking. "I can't watch you die." Before he could respond, she turned and vanished into the night like smoke. Che remained seated for a long time, staring at the space where she had stood. He knew what this was now. Not love. Not yet. But the beginning of something just as dangerous. Something that could either save them or consume them both. The rain began an hour before the meeting, and by the time Ernesto reached the old timber warehouse, it had become a storm, angry, wind-lashed, almost biblical in its intensity. The sky cracked with lightning, illuminating the building where Cuba's future would be decided, and where a single love story threatened to fracture the unity that held the revolution together. Inside, the leaders of the July 26th movement had already gathered. Tension hung in the air like the thick smell of diesel from the lamps burning along the walls. There were no cheers, no embraces, no jokes, none of the camaraderie that usually warmed their clandestine meetings. Tonight, eyes were sharp, guarded, suspicious. Tonight, the revolution felt less like a family and more like a courtroom. Che wiped the rain from his face, heart pounding with the knowledge that everything he valued, his comrades, his mission, his own sense of moral purpose, was perched on a knife's edge. And at the center of the storm, as always, was Lucia. She stood near the back wall, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Her hair was still damp from the rain. Droplets ran down her temple. Their eyes met for the briefest second. A silent plea, a silent apology, a silent fury, all tangled into one. But she quickly looked away. She didn't trust this room, not tonight. And she certainly didn't trust the whispers. Fidel was seated at the head of the table, looking grave, his fingers drumming slowly on the wood. He didn't greet Ernesto. He didn't smile. He simply said, "Let's begin." Manuel, the young commander who had been fueling the rumors, rose first. His gaze darted between Che and Lucia, and even in the dim light, his expression betrayed something deeper than political concern, jealousy, resentment, perhaps an old affection for Lucia that had not faded. "We have a problem," he started, his voice almost rehearsed. "There are compromises being made within our ranks, compromises of judgment, of discipline. Decisions influenced not by strategy, but by personal entanglements." His words spread through the room like falling dominoes. Shoulders stiffened, lips tightened. Ernesto felt heat rise behind his ribs. Fidel raised a hand. "Speak clearly, compañero. What exactly are you accusing?" Manuel inhaled, gaining courage from the murmurs around him. "I'm accusing Ernesto and Lucia of a relationship that jeopardizes operational security. Their closeness is affecting decisions. It's creating factions. It's distracting from the mission. Lucia scoffed loudly, a sharp cutting sound. This is ridiculous. But Manuel didn't look at her. His eyes stayed locked on Che. I think he's letting his emotions override strategic judgment. And I think she's manipulating him to push her own approach to sabotage operations. Gasps rippled through the room. Accusing Che of compromised judgment was bold enough, but claiming that Lucia, one of their most trusted infiltrators, was manipulating him bordered on treason within their own ranks. Fidel leaned back, studying Che with a face carved of stone. Ernesto, your answer. For a moment, silence pressed on Che's chest like a weight. He felt every eye in the room watching. Every breath felt too loud. His pulse throbbed in his throat. He knew that one sentence, one wrong sentence, could destroy Lucia, divide the movement, and jeopardize everything they bled for. He took a breath. Yes, he said. The room erupted. Chairs scraped. Two men cursed under their breath. Someone slammed a fist on the table. Lucia took one small step back, as if physically struck. Che raised his voice over the chaos. Yes, I care for her. More than a comrade. More than a friend. I won't insult you with lies. Manuel smirked in triumph, but Che wasn't finished. But, he continued, my judgment hasn't faltered. If anything, she has sharpened it. Lucia has saved my life twice. Her instincts infiltrating Batista's networks have been more valuable than any bullet we carry. You accuse her of manipulation? She's the reason half of you are still alive. Lucia stared at the floor, jaw trembling, not in weakness, but in fury and heartbreak, and something that looked like gratitude she didn't want to show. Fidel finally spoke, his voice low. Why didn't you tell me? Because I feared it would bring exactly this, Che answered. Division, distrust, a spectacle when we can afford none. Manuel snapped, you hid it because you knew it was wrong. Or because he thought he was protecting the revolution from our petty jealousies, Camillo retorted from across the table. His voice was calm, but sharp. Don't pretend your concern is purely strategic, Manuel. Whispers exploded again. But Fidel raised his hand, commanding silence. Lucia, Fidel said. You haven't spoken. She exhaled slowly and stepped forward. The lamp beside her flickered, casting half her face in gold and half in shadow. I owe you the truth, she began, her voice steady despite the storm outside and the storm inside this room. Yes, I love him. And yes, I tried to hide it. Not to manipulate him, not to gain influence, but because of the exact danger we face now, that my contributions would be discredited, that I would be seen not as a soldier, but as a woman in love. Her eyes locked on Manuel, and that someone would use it to settle their personal resentments. Manuel's jaw clenched. She continued, every operation I've run has been for this movement. I've risked capture every night while some of you slept. I've watched friends die. I've had to slit a man's throat while he begged for his life because he would have exposed us. If any of you think I would endanger the revolution for romance, then you never truly knew me. Her voice broke just slightly, enough for Che to feel it like a knife. I didn't ask for this love, she said, softer. But I also won't apologize for it. Fidel stared at her, expression unreadable. The storm roared above them like a warning. The warehouse doors rattled under the wind. Fidel finally rose from his chair. Enough. The revolution cannot survive if we let personal affairs divide us. But neither can it afford strategic compromise. He paced slowly, hands behind his back. So here is what I propose. Every head lifted. Ernesto and Lucia will no longer be allowed to operate in the same unit. Lucia inhaled sharply, eyes widening in panic. Che's fingers curled into fists. Fidel continued. Lucia will be reassigned to the Eastern Front. Ernesto remains here. Separation will remove conflict of interest and restore trust. Che stepped forward immediately. Fidel. No, Fidel cut him off. This is not a punishment. It's a necessity. Lucia's face had gone pale, but her eyes glistened with something fierce. She understood. Maybe she even expected this. But Che felt something break inside him. The thought of losing her, not to death or danger, but to enforced distance, felt crueler somehow. "This isn't fair," he murmured. Fidel looked him dead in the eye. "The revolution isn't fair. It demands sacrifices from all of us. Tonight, it demands this from you." Che swallowed hard. Lucia looked at him, and in her gaze he saw everything: love, sorrow, pride, resignation, stubborn hope. Before either could speak, Manuel added, "And how can we trust they won't simply meet in secret?" Lucia stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Because we aren't children. Because we understand what's at stake. Because we are revolutionaries first." Che nodded, slowly, painfully. "We'll follow your command, Fidel. But don't ever mistake love for weakness." Fidel studied him for a long moment before nodding. Then it settled. The meeting dissolved into murmurs. Some argued quietly. Some looked relieved. Some looked torn. But Che didn't register any of it. His eyes were on Lucia. She approached him as the others filtered out. Rain pounded the tin roof above like 1,000 drums. Lightning flashed, turning her eyes silver. "This isn't the end," she whispered. "No," he said. "But it will feel like it." Her breath trembled as she lifted a hand to touch his cheek. "We'll keep fighting. For Cuba. For them. And for us, someday." Che closed his eyes as her thumb traced his jaw. He memorized the warmth of her hand, the shape of her silhouette, the storm-lit glow of her face. He didn't know how long the separation would last. He didn't know if one of them might be dead before they saw each other again. But he knew this: the revolution had taken many things from him. It would take many more, but it could never erase what they had lived. The warehouse doors opened. Wind swept in, cold and violent. Her cloak whipped around her as she stepped into the rain. Che watched her until she disappeared into the night. The storm swallowed her whole, and with it the part of Ernesto Guevara that belonged only to her. The months that followed felt like years. Che had endured hunger, illness, and the constant threat of death in the Sierra Maestra, but nothing tested him the way absence did. Lucia's reassignment to the Eastern Front had created a distance far wider than the rugged mountains of Cuba. It carved a hollow inside him, one he filled with duty, discipline, and the relentless push of military life, but which still throbbed with quiet longing in the rare moments he found solitude. The comrades noticed the change. Che was still sharp, still fearless, still the man who marched through swamps with asthma and laughed at danger, but something behind his eyes had darkened. He spoke less, smiled less. The night fires that once echoed with stories now burned beside him in near silence, his thoughts drifting to a woman navigating her own battlefield far beyond his reach. For Lucia, the Eastern Front was harsher than anything she had faced before. She infiltrated networks twice as dangerous, operated with fewer resources, and found herself constantly shifting identities to survive Batista's tightening surveillance. Rumors of her death reached Che twice, once from a frightened messenger, once from an intercepted radio report. Both times he nearly mounted an unauthorized mission to find her. Both times Fidel stopped him, reminding him that the revolution depended on discipline, not desperate acts. But the heart does not obey chains. And one crisp November morning, a breathless courier arrived in Che's camp with a sealed envelope pressed tight against his chest. "From the East," he whispered. Che's hands shook as he took the letter. The handwriting alone almost brought him to his knees. He stepped away from the camp, walked until the jungle swallowed all sound, and sat on a fallen log as if bracing for impact. He opened the letter. "My Ernesto, if you're reading this, it means I survived the last mission. I write that not to be dramatic, but because every sunrise here feels stolen. I've learned that the enemy has begun to identify my patterns, so I am becoming smoke, shifting, disappearing, reappearing where they least expect me. But I am tired in a way I cannot say aloud to the men I lead. And tonight, as I sit under a sky full of stars that look far too gentle for a world like ours, I needed to write to the one soul who knows the weight of all this. They say discipline keeps us alive, but Ernesto, sometimes love does too. Sometimes love is the only thing that reminds us why we must survive at all. I miss you more than I can bear. L. Che lowered the paper, exhaling sharply. The sound that escaped him was halfway between a laugh and a sob. The wind rustled the trees above, but the forest felt impossibly still, as if listening. He read the letter again, and again, each time. The words ignited something warm inside the cold metal of his revolutionary resolve. It wasn't distraction. It wasn't weakness. It was fuel. It was purpose. He folded the letter carefully and pressed it to his lips. "Stay alive, Lucia," he whispered. "Stay alive until this is over." Winter brought intensified operations. Batista's army, cornered and desperate, cracked down harder than ever. They deployed new intelligence units, more brutal than before, and rumors swept the mountains that the Eastern Front had suffered heavy losses. Che couldn't sleep. Every explosion in the distance felt like her name written in fire. Every casualty report twisted in his gut like a blade. One night, as he was preparing an ambush near Las Villas, Fidel approached him quietly. "Walk with me." They hiked up a ridge overlooking the darkened valley. The moon hung low, pale and exhausted. "You've heard the rumors," Fidel said. Che's mouth dried. "Lucia." Fidel didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the horizon, jaw tight. The Eastern Front was hit last night. Harder than expected. They're still accounting for survivors. Che felt the world tilt. His lungs seized. For a moment he thought his asthma had flared. But it was fear, violent, unforgiving fear. "Is she alive?" he forced out. "We don't know yet." Che turned away, gripping a tree for balance. His knuckles whitened. "Fidel, if she..." "Stop," Fidel said gently. "We don't mourn until we know. And even then, we move forward." Che swallowed the pain like broken glass, letting it cut him from the inside. He didn't sleep that night. He barely breathed. 2 days later, while Che's column rested near a creek, a lone figure approached from a brush. Her clothes were torn, her boots soaked with mud, her hair tangled. She walked with the stagger of someone who had marched for days without rest. Che saw her silhouette first. His heart dropped. Then it soared. "Lucia." She didn't answer. She simply collapsed forward. He caught her before she hit the ground, lowering her gently into his arms. She was conscious, barely, eyes fluttering open with immense effort. "You," her voice cracked. "You're real." He pulled her against his chest, feeling her trembling breath. "You're alive," he whispered into her hair, a tremor running through him. "You're alive. I thought I'd lost you. I nearly didn't make it." She coughed weakly. "They surrounded us. We scattered. I spent 2 days in the swamps, hiding from patrols. I couldn't risk traveling with anyone. They would have been spotted." She looked up at him, eyes glassy with exhaustion and emotion. "I had to see you. If I died, I needed it to be after seeing your face one more time." Che closed his eyes, his forehead resting against hers. "Don't say that. Don't ever say that." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "The last letter," she whispered, "in case I didn't survive." Che pushed her hand gently closed around it. "No, keep it. You're not dying. Not tonight." She managed a tired smile. "You can't command life like you command troops." "Watch me," he muttered. That night, they rested in a small abandoned hut deep in the forest, far from the main camp. Che tended to her wounds, scratches, bruises, infected cuts from wading through swamps. She watched him silently, her gaze soft despite the pain. "You look older," she murmured. "You look like death wrestled you and lost," he replied. She laughed, the sound hoarse but real. "You always know how to charm a woman." He placed a hand on her cheek. "Lucia, don't ever vanish like that again." Her eyes softened, but her answer was steady. "If the revolution demands it, I will." Che closed his eyes. That was the truth neither of them could escape. Their love lived in the gaps between gunfire and secrecy, between missions and wounds, between life and the constant risk of losing it. They didn't touch like lovers that night. There was no space for that kind of peace. Instead, they lay side by side on the wooden floor, fingers intertwined, listening to the distant gunfire echoing through the mountains. Two soldiers. Two souls suspended between hope and fear. Two hearts trying to beat in rhythm with a future they weren't sure they'd survive to see. At dawn, Lucia knew she had to return to the Eastern Front. And Che knew he couldn't stop her. They stood outside the hut, the morning light washing her face in gold. Leaves shimmered with dew. The air smelled of wet earth and the beginning of another dangerous day. "This isn't goodbye," she said, adjusting her pack. "No," Che agreed, taking her hands. "But it feels like one." She looked up at him with eyes full of unspoken words: love, fear, promise, defiance. "I'll survive," she whispered. "Not for myself, for Cuba, for the future, and for the moment when this war ends and we no longer have to hide." He pulled her close, holding her as if trying to memorize the shape of her against him. "Promise me," he whispered. "I promise." Then she stepped back, turned, and walked into the forest, disappearing the way she had arrived, quiet, fierce, unbroken. Che stood there long after she vanished, the dawn spreading pink and gold across the sky. He touched his chest, where her letter rested against his heart. She was alive. And for now, that was enough to keep fighting. Years later, long after the gunfire had faded from the mountains and the sound of marching boots had become an echo in history, people would ask Che Guevara how he survived the most dangerous nights of the revolution. They expected stories of ambushes, grenades, narrow escapes, and medical miracles. He would answer the same way every time. Hope. Hope kept me alive. What he never said, what he never wrote in his journals, what no official biography would ever record, was that hope had a name: Lucia. Her existence lived between the lines of history, hidden in the spaces where no one bothered to look. The revolution chronicled battles, victories, declarations, and treaties, but the quiet, trembling moments between two soldiers who loved each other more fiercely than they loved their own lives? No historian would ever ask about that. But it existed, and it shaped him more deeply than anyone ever knew. When Havana finally fell and Batista fled the island under a sky of fireworks and desperate fear, Che was among the first to ride into the capital. The people cheered, throwing flowers, embracing the bearded rebels as liberators. Cameras flashed. Songs erupted. Mothers held up their children so they could see history passing in front of them. Che smiled for the crowds, waved at the children, shook hands with workers lining the streets. But inside, he was looking for one face. A face he had dreamed about on cold nights in the mountains. A face he had feared would vanish into memory. The revolution was won, but victory meant nothing without knowing whether Lucia had survived to see the dawn they'd fought for. He asked soldiers from the Eastern Front. He checked rosters. He visited medical tents. Some said they'd seen her. Some said they hadn't. Some said she'd been injured. Some didn't know her name. The revolution was a roar. Her name was a whisper inside it. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Che began to accept the possibility that war had taken something from him more valuable than any victory. Yet every night, when the city fell silent and the new government worked through stacks of reports and policies, Che would stare out the window at the darkened streets and wonder, where is she? Is she alive? Does she still carry my letters? Does she remember the storm? The hut? My heartbeat against hers? Hope kept him alive during the war. After the war, hope kept him awake. Nearly a year into the new government, Che found himself buried in administrative work, paperwork, requisitions, reports on land reform, literacy programs, military reorganizations. He missed the mountains. He missed the clarity of knowing who the enemy was. But most of all, he missed the woman whose voice still lived in his memory. One humid afternoon, while sorting through personnel records, he found a sealed folder. It bore the crest of the Eastern Front. His heart stopped. He opened it. Inside was a list of comrades lost or severely wounded in the final months of the war. His eyes scanned the pages so fast they blurred. Lucia Alvarez. Status: missing. Presumed dead. Last known location: Sierra del Cristal, March 1958. Che closed the folder slowly, fingers trembling. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He simply stared at the wall, unable to breathe, the world tilting around him like a ship caught in a sudden storm. Missing. Presumed dead. The words felt like bullets fired into his chest. But a small detail caught his eye, something most would overlook. Next to her name, in small handwriting, "No body recovered." Che closed his eyes. A spark ignited. No body recovered. It wasn't proof of life, but it wasn't proof of death either. And for Che, who had clung to hope across mountains and minefields, that tiny detail was enough to pull him back from the edge of despair. A few months later, Che stood on the docks at sunrise, preparing to leave Cuba for his international mission. He had been appointed to represent the revolution abroad, a role that meant travel, diplomacy, and long stretches away from home. He felt restless, unfinished, as if something essential had been left undone. The sun rose slowly, painting the water in gold. And then, he saw a figure standing at the far end of the dock. A woman, still, silent, watching the sea, his breath caught. No, impossible. But the silhouette, the stance, the curve of her neck, the tilt of her head. Che's bag slipped from his shoulder. He walked forward, then faster. Then he broke into a run. Lucia. The woman turned. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, a scar cut across her brow. But her eyes, those fierce, defiant, fire-lit eyes, were unmistakable. Ernesto. He reached her and froze, not out of hesitation, but because he was afraid to touch her, afraid she might vanish like a dream. "You're alive," he whispered. "So are you," she said with a tired smile. "We're both too stubborn to die." He cupped her face with trembling hands, searching her expression, looking for proof, explanation, forgiveness, everything. "How?" he finally breathed. She exhaled shakily. "After the ambush, I was captured. I escaped months later. I couldn't risk returning right away. They would have followed me. I waited, hid in Santiago, recovered. When the war ended, I tried to find you, but you were always in a different province. A different mission. A different city." Her voice cracked. "I even thought you might have forgotten me." "Never," Che whispered. Her eyes shone, not with tears, but with the same quiet, unbreakable emotion that had kept her alive through swamps and prisons and nightmares. They didn't embrace immediately. They simply stood there inches apart, letting the reality settle around them like warm rain. When he finally pulled her into his arms, it wasn't the desperate embrace of lovers reunited after war. It was something deeper. A promise finally fulfilled. A circle finally closed. A wound finally healed. But destiny was cruel. Che knew he was about to leave Cuba. This mission was important, perhaps the beginning of a new era in his revolutionary life. And Lucia, now free but scarred by her experiences, wasn't ready to disappear into another war zone or political front. They sat on the edge of the dock, feet dangling above the water, as seagulls cried overhead. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Che looked at the horizon, the long road, the unfinished tasks, the revolutions still burning across the world. "I don't know," he admitted. "I wish I could take you with me. I wish I could stay. But history doesn't ask what we wish." She nodded slowly. "I didn't survive everything just to hold you back," she murmured. "And you didn't survive to stay still." He took her hand. "Will you wait for me?" She smiled, not the soft smile of a woman making a romantic promise, but the sharp, determined smile of a soldier who had defied death and fate too many times to fear uncertainty. "I'll live," she said. "That's my promise. Not waiting, not hoping, just living. If life brings us together again, it will be because we fought hard enough to deserve it." He kissed her forehead, a gentle, lingering kiss filled with everything words could not hold. When he boarded the ship, he turned back one last time. Lucia stood there, the wind tugging at her clothes, the sun rising behind her, turning her into a silhouette of strength and memory. She raised her hand. So did he. They did not know if destiny would give them another meeting. But they knew this. Their love had survived the revolution. It would survive time. It would survive silence. And even if history never recorded her name, Che carried Lucia with him into every battlefield, every speech, every impossible challenge. She was his unspoken chapter, his hidden epilogue, his forbidden love that shaped the man the world would one day call a legend.